What's up? I'm Jack. Welcome back to the LFC Transfer Room. Today's video is an option preview ahead of Liverpool's match against Watford in the Premier League on Saturday. Joining us to discuss things is Adam Leventhal from The Athletic. He spoke to Chris Donage, gave some really great answers about what to expect at Vicarage Road. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get into things. You can't talk about Watford without talking about managerial turnover. So, new guy, Claudio Ranieri, not new to the Premier League, but new to Watford. What can we expect? And what should we make of the last few months in terms of managers for Watford?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because often outside the Watford bubble, people will go, oh, they're at it again. But this time around, with Xisco Munoz losing his job and Claudio Ranieri coming in, to be brutally honest, it was sort of creeping up that Watford did need to perhaps have someone that had a little bit more nous to deal with the challenges of the Premier League. You'll remember last season when Watford were in the Championship, Munoz came in, his first game was on Boxing Day, and he really lifted spirits and was a real sort of positive presence around Vicarage Road after Vladimir Ivic, who'd been in charge, was, he's a good manager, he's a decent tactical manager, but he didn't really bring much feel good to the whole thing. And that's exactly what Munoz was able to do. He did the job that he was asked to do, he got them promoted, but and this was reflected in Watford's statement, this season there hadn't been the progression that they would have hoped for, and it was always a little bit of a risk throwing in a rookie into the Premier League. And they made the decision at, I suppose, the best time, one of these international breaks, to just make that clean break, say thank you very much, but we're going to now put our weight behind someone who has a huge amount of experience. And we heard from Ranieri in his first news conference, and he did just drop in the fact that Xisco Munoz was one of his players at Valencia when he was in his second spell in charge at Valencia in 2004-05, and that was 16 years ago, and he'd already been managing for 19 years before that. So it just sort of shows you that there's such a huge disparity between the experience of Munoz and the experience of Ranieri, and that is what Watford now are hoping will actually just bring a little bit more cohesion to the whole operation.
Adam says he doesn't expect the new manager bounce to be as effective considering it's against Liverpool, and there's very few tests as tough as Liverpool for a new manager. But definitely one thing that they'll want to do in their first match would be the dream start for Ranieri would be a repeat of the February 2020 fixture when Watford won 3-0 against Liverpool at Vicarage Road. So could that happen again? Adam gives his thoughts on that.
Well, I think it's going to be really difficult to perform to that level again. I think there's always that contributory factor of games being under the lights as well. I'm sure it's the same at Anfield as it is at Vicarage Road. It's always, I don't know, it just adds something to the atmosphere, and certainly, that helped that night. Well, I remember at the time I wrote an article on The Athletic afterwards, basically saying that was Watford's greatest ever performance, bar none. And that was how impressive it was in the context of the opponents, the fact that, it was just a red steamroller at the time, and Watford somehow managed to stem the tide. They also had a difficult moment within the game, losing Gerard Deulofeu, which could have hit them for 6, but they kept their nerve, they kept kicking on, and that was the day that Ismaila Sarr really launched himself to a higher level. Certainly got himself, in the eyes of the recruitment team at Liverpool, because subsequent to that, Liverpool were trying to sign Ismaila Sarr. But it was a performance where, Liverpool weren't quite at it. They weren't quite fully on it. I mean, this was at the time when COVID was just sort of creeping in, and there'd been a lot of traveling around and things like that. So there might have been a little bit of mitigation involved in Liverpool's levels at that point, but Watford were absolutely fantastic that night, and I don't think Liverpool knew what had hit them. And maybe there might have been a little bit of complacency involved, thinking that Watford are on their way out, and Watford hadn't been on a particularly good run up until that point. Initially, when Nigel Pearson came in, they did really well and beat Man United and beat Wolves and beat Aston Villa and stuff like that, performed well at Anfield, as we mentioned earlier on. But they hadn't been on a good run. And maybe Liverpool thought, look, we'll simply turn up and win. And quite rightly so, they were on a fantastic run. But, you know, I don't think now Liverpool would turn up to Vicarage Road and think this is going to be easy, especially with a new manager involved. And Watford do have match-winning players like Sarr. And there are others there as well. And there might be a few thrown in that aren't necessarily or haven't been given that much of an opportunity so far this season due to the injuries that Watford have also picked up. So look, if they repeat that victory, then it would be sensational. Claudio Ranieri, when he was speaking in his news conference, it was referenced that back in the day when he was in charge of Leicester, he promised that if they kept a clean sheet against Stoke, he would buy them all pizza. He was asked whether that would be the case if they managed to do the same against Liverpool. And he said, look, they'll get more than pizza if we keep a clean sheet against Liverpool. I'll buy them all dinner. You know, pizza would not be enough. So he knows how tough it's going to be against Liverpool. The expectation will be that Liverpool go there. And yeah, there might be a bit of Watford sort of up and at them and a bit of rough and tumble, but they'll come through it and they will win. But who knows? No one thought that on that famous leap year day, February the 29th, 2020, that was going to happen. So we do know, and with Ranieri in charge, we know that random things do happen. Look at what happened with Leicester. So there is a slim chance, not a massive chance though.
Now, Watford not having the greatest starts of the season, what is some of the weaknesses that could be exploited by Liverpool and could be an explanation for some of the start of their season?
At the moment, as I mentioned before, defensively, they have been a little bit shaky. In the centre of defence, they've had a couple of really sort of tricky performances, which has seen a shift between Francisco Ciralta, who's a Chilean central defender, and he didn't start the season because he was injured and then out of favour. Then he came back in, and then he scored an own goal against Wolves and he was dropped. So there was a bit of disruption, and Craig Cathcart came back into the side. Cathcart didn't look particularly convincing. He's probably going to play because Christian Cabasele, who's another central defender, he's also picked up an injury. So there aren't really any other options apart from William Troost-Ekong and Craig Cathcart. So it's going to be a big test for both of them against, Liverpool's front three. In terms of midfield, the combination hasn't been quite right yet. And there has been another injury that's been picked up in midfield. Peter Atibo, who's been playing in a sort of holding midfield role, playing with 1-6 and 2 8s. They haven't quite mastered that yet. There has been, other players brought in. Imran Louza, who was originally brought in to play as a holding midfielder, hasn't really had that opportunity yet. Ozan Tufan, who's an experienced Turkish international, we're just trying to work out exactly where he fits in, playing a little bit further forward. Then you've got Musa Sissoko and Juraj Kutska, Tom Cleverley. So they're all sort of vying for positions. And it'll be interesting to see how Ranieri sets up his side. In terms of actually getting the ball in the back of the net, that has been an issue. Although they've played 2 games and they've scored 3 goals in 2 games, 1 against Aston Villa, where they caught them cold basically on the opening day, and then 3 against Norwich. And everyone, let's be honest, are beating Norwich at the moment, bar Burnley. So they haven't been able to be a consistent threat in the attacking third. And if Ranieri can just sort of focus their minds and remind them that they can be dangerous, show them some videos of that game against Liverpool back in the day, things like that. If they can maybe press a little bit harder, higher up the pitch, which they haven't been doing, risk reward, try and sort of force a mistake out of their opponents a little bit higher up the field. They've got the pace and they've got the power and they've got the technical ability to score goals. But they do also have another injury. Joshua King picked up an injury against Leeds and he hasn't scored yet. He had a goal disallowed in the last game against Newcastle at home at Vicarage Road, and that was a real sort of puncturing moment for him because he thought that he got off the mark and then he picked up an injury at Leeds. But hopefully that's not going to be too long an injury. So, looking back at my answer now, I'm basically saying that there's weaknesses all over the field, but it's not that bad. They just need to have a little bit of a reset, get back to basics, and they can be a match for nearly everyone in the Premier League. I think they have got players that can hurt opponents, and if Ranieri can put that belief in, then hopefully there will be some rewards at the end of the season, and he'll still be in charge.
If Watford are to get a result, it'll be with a player that Liverpool have been linked heavily with in the last 18 months, and that's Ismaila Sarr. What kind of impact could he make on the right side of the pitch, and how much of an impact, can you expect Sarr to make on the match?
Obviously, anyone that is up against Ismaila Sarr is going to struggle due to the fact that he has got lightning express pace. He's a lot cleverer as well than he was a couple of seasons ago. He's learnt when to sort of stop and then go. So it is going to be a test for Andy Robertson on that side. And I remember I went up to Melwood when Sarr had just joined, and Sadio Mane agreed to do an interview with me. And he did say that, he instantly, as Sarr was arriving in the Premier League, went and spoke to Andy Robertson and said, "Look, watch out for this kid because he's going to kill you." I think that was the phrase that he used. So they will be well aware of that threat. And obviously, Sadio Mane and Ismaila Sarr have been away together for Senegal during this international break. So I'm sure it's come up in conversation, but that will be something that Liverpool will be well aware of. Elsewhere, maybe, if it's Kelleher in goal, then have some more shots. And that's one thing that Watford haven't been doing enough of. They need to be playing, as I mentioned before, in terms of pressing. They need to be playing a little bit more risk-reward football, speculate to accumulate, that sort of stuff. Try and push on a little bit more. Just chance your arm a little bit more. And if it is a more inexperienced goalkeeper in goal, then try your luck. I mean, you have to go back to, 2015-16, when Liverpool came under Klopp. I think that was his first season, and Watford won 3-0, and it was Adam Bogdan who was in goal that day. And Watford made it really difficult. They got on top of him. And
really appreciate Adam's time and some tremendous insight overall. Thanks to Chris as well for doing that interview, because American accent, these happen pretty early in the morning in the UK. It's really early in the morning here in the United States. Let's take a look at some of the lineups, some what we can expect. With new manager, it's really tough to get a sense for what we might expect for Claudio Ranieri's first appearance at Watford, first match at Watford, I should say. Sam Maguire had an interesting piece, or an interesting few tweets, where he mentioned that how he lined up at Sampdoria, Ranieri did, could indicate a 4-4-2, two banks of four, and really kind of rely on engaging with the opposition in the defensive third, not so much in the offensive attacking end of things. So I think that really, for Liverpool to break them down, it's going to have to be with some pretty effective play throughout the pitch. So no Fabinho, no Alisson. I actually don't know why I have Alisson here. We're actually going to flip him over, and he's going to be Raheem Kelleher, I hope. Please do not make it Adrian. I like the guy as a person, do not like him in between the sticks for Liverpool. No Fabinho as well means Liverpool lose a really great defensive presence. Henderson likely to step into that number 6 role. Milner probably in the midfield as well. I think you'd expect, I wouldn't expect Naby Keita. I love Naby Keita to play, but the issue is he would play about 4 matches in 10 days, which I do not want to do for his fitness sakes. So I think Oxlade-Chamberlain, I don't have a 15 tile, so just imagine for argument's sake this is an Oxlade-Chamberlain, and that would lead to a front 3 potentially of Mane, Salah, Firmino. Mane, Salah, Firmino, Jota potentially playing as well. It's going to be interesting on who ends up joining that front 3. I think that regardless, it's going to be a pretty interesting turnover compared to the Madrid match that's going to be happening 3 days afterwards. This lineup could be a bit different. I think one of the biggest matchups in the match is going to be Andrew Robertson versus Ismaila Sarr. Really, can he handle the pace? Can he stay in front of him? Can he stay effective? Leventhal mentioning that when he spoke to Sadio Mane, that about Ismaila Sarr, he talked to Robertson and said, watch out for this guy on the right wing, watch out for what he could potentially do. So that battle is something to watch all match long. So you may have to expect a bit more creativity from Liverpool's midfielders, or a bit more help defensively from Liverpool's left-sided midfielder, which, as things stand, looks to be James Milner. So if you'd imagine James Milner and Robertson trying to just deal with things here, it may actually lead to a bit of a lack of support for Mane, so maybe there's a bit of knock-on effects there. But again, Liverpool, heavy favorites. Very interesting how they line up, though. With both Jota and Alexander-Arnold expected to be fit. No Jones, however, it's going to be a very interesting match, interesting lineup. You'd have to hope no repeat of February 2020, but we remain to see what happens in that one. What are your thoughts on the lineup? What are your thoughts on what Liverpool could potentially bring out at Vicarage Road? Many thanks to Adam yet again for coming onto the channel. Really appreciate his time. You can catch some of his work in the description down below. That's going to do it for today's opposition review of Watford. We're going to have content before, after the match, right after this video goes live. We'll be having a stream, so make sure to subscribe to the channel for all your Liverpool content heading into the return of play after the international break. That's going to do it for the video today. I've been Jack for the LFC Transfer Room. Make sure to subscribe and take care.